April 26, 1993 Observer Newsletter, Disastrous WCW Show at MSG, KERRY von ERICH Shocker. Hogan/Yoko. By Observer Staff. April 26, 1993. World Championship Wrestling's return to New York and debut in Madison Square Garden on April 14 turned out to be one of those nights the company would just as soon forget ever happened. The show at the 4,500-seat Paramount Theater, part of the MSG complex, received unanimous negative reports, including by those within the company. The show got off to a bad start with the strange stopping of a hot Ron Simmons vs. Chris Benoit match and the announcement that Ric Flair, scheduled to do an interview segment, wouldn't appear due to a problem with his flight from Charlotte, which was legitimate in that the flight he was on had an engine problem and had to return to Charlotte. From that point, there were regular chants of "We want Flair" and "We want a refund," which hampered the rest of the show, which from most reports, had no matches better than 3 stars and was compared unfavorably in most accounts to WrestleMania. Even worse was the inability to sell out the small venue after being out of the nation's largest market for approximately 1 year. The show drew about 2,900 paid, about 3,500 in the building, and a $47,000 house. While much larger than the typical WCW house show gate, those figures for New York can't be considered successful, especially with the track record of NWA/WCW over the years in the New York market, which has shown significant drop every time in a return business. The show opened with Johnny B. Bad beating Tex Slashinger and Maxx Payne beating Steve Regal in a weak matches. Simmons-Benoit followed, opening with a hot 2 minutes which was largely described as the best action on the entire card, then shockingly ending at that point. The announcement was made that due to the 2 wrestlers violating WCW rules, that the match was being stopped and ruled as it never took place. For reasons that nobody has made clear, one of the agents backstage ordered Nick Patrick to ringside to inform the local referee to stop the match immediately, which left a major sour note with the crowd that the show largely never recovered from. The match was booked to go about 9 minutes with Simmons going over, so this problem was not one of bad booking but of a decision made backstage which nobody is taking credit for and there has been no real explanation for. Before that match came the announcement that Flair wasn't going to be there. After the hot but unfulfilling Simmons-Benoit moment came the Van Hammer vs. Vinny Vegas match, which was described as worse than their usual road match. It actually lasted 9 minutes, although some said it seemed like it was 3 hours, and nearly everyone thought it was longer than 15 minutes because of how one's perception of time is sometimes warped when having fun. Although the show got better from that point, the overall reaction to the show remained negative, closing with a Sting vs. Big Van Vader title match ending with a simple Harley Race interferes for the DQ finish, which only added to the feeling of being ripped off by the high $25, $19, $11 ticket prices. Many of the babyfaces were heavily booed, in particular Van Hammer and Marcus Bagwell. Most of the top company brass was at the show, and seated with them was Vern Gagne, who might as well have been responsible for this lesson in how not to put on a live show. WCW also ran its first house show in years in Toronto at Sky Dome on April 17. This was said to have been a really good show, capped off by the largest house in several months for an ordinary house show in the high $50,000s with all tickets $15, just under 4,000 paid. Ironically, the Toronto date was a sold show, which means WCW received a flat fee from the local promoters for providing the event rather than receiving the gate. From what I was told, the Sky Dome people did a great job of making the crowd size look good and not looking bad to hinder the show by the way the place was set up. 4,300 people in a 60,000-seat building is set up poorly, can look disastrous, and has been known to kill more than one show. From several reports, Kevin Atkinson, Kevin Von Erich, held up GWF promoter Gray Pearson for $1,000 cash before the show on the April 2 benefit show at the Sportatorium for his nieces. All the wrestlers had agreed to work the card with no payment since it was advertised that all the proceeds would go into a trust fund for the 2 young daughters of his late brother KERRY. Pearson had agreed to reimburse wrestlers for transportation costs and had told wrestlers that if they had to cancel a prior booking in order to appear on the show, that he would reimburse them for missing the booking. None of the wrestlers on the show asked for any money for either transportation or reimbursement for canceling a prior engagement besides Kevin. Kevin claimed he had a prior booking that night in Birmingham, Alabama, which brought with it a $1,000 payoff. We have no record of any such a show in Birmingham on that evening that Kevin would have been booked on, let alone had been promised that kind of a payoff, which would be labeled as very unusual in the independent market for a wrestler of Kevin's caliber, but not necessarily impossible. Kevin is believed to be on a tour of Nigeria, so nobody has heard his side of the story. According to other reports, there was no show in Birmingham and the promotion paid him the money before the show, figuring his no-showing that particular event would cause numerous problems, especially with the potential fear that should he not appear that his father might choose to leave with him. Wrestlers holding up promoters at the last minute and promoters underpaying wrestlers what they promised ahead of time is as old as the wrestling business itself, which doesn't make it correct. But in many ways this is almost inherently in many cases an unscrupulous business. However, this particular incident of doing so on a benefit show where everyone else on the card gave up their Friday night and worked for free on a benefit show for one's own nieces does seem to set new record in that regard. Speaking of the Von Erichs, Texas magazine, a Sunday newspaper supplement similar to Parade, will be doing another major feature on the family. Based on what I'm told, Nick Atkinson is a lot more open about certain things in this article as compared with previous ones. The April 12th edition of Monday Night Raw, complete with the sensational Sherry Luna Vachon clothes-ripping angle, drew a Clash-like 3.4 rating, which made it the highest-rated regular weekly televised wrestling show in 20 months. Largely that much talked about an angle, which ended up with Luna getting carried out by Sergeant Slaughter with her pants pulled down and Sherry doing an interview wearing nothing but her underwear, can't be given credit, because viewership is based more on interest garnered in previous weeks. People tuning in don't know what is going to happen ahead of time. In this case, the number was probably related to the previous week, April 5th, being the lowest rated Raw in its short history due largely to it going head-to-head with the finals of the NCAA men's basketball tournament. For a lot of casual college basketball fans, and this apparently includes a sizable percentage of the regular Raw audience, this was the first Raw that they were going to watch after WrestleMania, so the usual rating increase after a pay-per-view in this case was on a one-week delay. The ratings for all other cable wrestling shows this past week were more depressing than impressive, with it being the lowest rated weekend with the exception of Raw since the fallout of last summer and fall. WCW's series of boring television shows during the previous weeks was probably the main reason in the April 10th WCW Saturday Night doing a 2.0 and Main Event the next day doing a 1.7, while Power Hour did a 1.2. This marks the sixth consecutive week that the Saturday night ratings have either dropped or stayed constant, which does coincide with the week after the new regime had its first television show. I'll assume that trend either ended this past weekend or almost sure will end this coming weekend because of the Vader Cactus Jack matches. The remaining WWF cable shows of the weekend, All-American 1.9 and Mania 0.9, were also among their lowest ratings since their new cable format was introduced in January. TC London Publishing, which puts out the most well-known non-singular promotion wrestling mags on the market, led by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, recently was sold to a Pennsylvania-based company, and the move from the longtime headquarters in Rockville Center, New York to a Philadelphia suburb of Ambler, Pennsylvania is scheduled to take place this coming week. It was long talked about that the change in ownership and location would result in major changes in magazine content. While that may still occur, the three most well-known names on the editorial staff, Bill Apter, Craig Peters and Stu Sachs, are all making the move to Pennsylvania. At least two others, Chris Bernaca and Andy Rodriguez, will continue to write freelance articles for the various magazine titles but will not be making the move or working full-time. Two others, Bob Smith and Roy London, had both left the company in recent months, with Smith now working for Wrestling Main Event, a competing magazine, while London has been working as a staff photographer for the World Wrestling Federation. What was reported as one of the hottest indie shows of the year took place April 17th in Minneapolis, drawing 750 fans for a show co-promoted by Pro Wrestling America and Dennis Coralluzzo of New Jersey, promoting under the National Wrestling Alliance banner. The show was highlighted by what I'm told were excellent matches, with Road Warrior Hawk going to a double countout with Terry Funk in a match which contained almost nothing inside the ring, and Lightning Kid beating Sabu via DQ in a match filled with unique high-risk moves, with Sabu being the most impressive on the show to an audience that had never seen him before. Among the moves he did were a Liger dive over the top of the mid-air flip, an Osai moonsault, technically called a quebrada, and an inventive move where he leapt over the top rope while Kid was on the apron into a sunset flip type of maneuver that ended up turning into a flying power bomb onto the floor. The show was largely raved about by those who saw it live, with some even saying Kid vs. Sabu was the best match they had ever seen. Masa Saito from Japan and Chris Condito from New Jersey also worked the undercard, which was comprised mainly of Minnesota-based talent. Ed Sharkey was planning on giving Wally Carbo an award at this show for his decades of contribution to the Midwestern wrestling scene, but with Carbo's recent passing away, the award was accepted by his son Steve. Coralluzzo is looking at putting together a return show, although no date was announced. It should also be noted that Hawk gave back $100 of his payoff to a fund to benefit the ill child that the show was planned as a fundraiser for, which is only being mentioned here because nobody is supposed to know about it. All Japan's Champion Carnival Singles Tournament is winding down to its final day with the expected standings gridlock. The championship match is set for April 21st at the Yokohama Bunka Gym between the two leading point-getters of the round-robin tournament. As of April 19th, with one show left in the round-robin aspect of the tournament, the standings were as follows: 1. Mitsuharu Misawa 20-2. Terry Gordy 19-3. Steve Williams 19, Gordy in second because he defeated Williams head-to-head on April 12 in Osaka. 4. Stan Hansen 18-5. Akira Tao 17-6. Toshiaki Kawada 16-7. Kenta Kobashi 14-8. Johnny Ace 8-9. Davey Boy Smith 6-10. The Patriot 5-11. Dan Crawford and Doug Furnas tied at 4-13. Jun Akiyama 0 injured opening day of tour and forfeited every match. This clinches that the final match will involve either Misawa, Gordy, Williams, Hansen or Tao. Most likely Hansen was going to win his last match on April 20, giving him 20 points, and face Misawa on April 21 for the championship. There is a good reason for either to win. Since Misawa holds the Triple Crown, Hansen should win to give Misawa a bona fide number 1 contender. However, since Hansen beat Misawa in the round robin, Misawa should gain revenge in the championship match. 2 points are awarded for a win and 1 point for a 30-minute draw. Disqualifications and countouts don't exist in All Japan. Even though this tournament has been a lot more interesting than in years past when there weren't any surprises in the results, it has somewhat been overshadowed by other wrestling happenings in Japan. The result is that the major shows this past week in both Osaka and Nagoya failed to sell out. In Osaka on April 12, even with 3 great on-paper tournament matches, Misawa vs. Kobashi, Kawada vs. Tao, and the first Japanese match ever of Gordy vs. Williams, the show drew 5,700 in the 7,000-seat arena. The main reason for the non-sellout is that it was the third straight show in the same arena, as UWFI on April 10 oversold the building with 7,500, and All Japan Women on April 11 for the Dream Slam 2 announced 7,300, which would be an overflow, although 6,500 was probably closer to reality. In Nagoya on April 14 they only drew 4,100 for Misawa vs. Gordy, Hansen vs. Tao, Kawada vs. Kobashi, Williams vs. Dan Crawford, and Doug Furnas vs. the Patriot. Still, the surprises to keep the standings intact continue as Misawa did his second tournament job for Gordy. However, Gordy on April 17 put over Hansen. Davey Boy Smith, despite his superstar status in Europe and big push in WWF since his last All Japan tour, seems to be paying his dues since he only won 2 singles matches the entire tournament, only from Crawford and Furnas. Judging from interviews that started airing this weekend, it appears the WWF summer plan is for the June 13 pay-per-view show from Dayton to be headlined by the first Hogan-Yokozuna title match plus the King of the Ring tournament. SummerSlam in late August, at a site that is yet to be announced. I don't think it will be European, if only because 1994 Royal Rumble was scheduled for Europe, although those plans may have fallen through. Appears to be building toward a Hogan vs. Bret Hart main event. Hart cut an interview on the Raw that aired April 19 on April 12 talking about his hit list being Lex Luger, Yokozuna, and Hogan, and also listed the same 3 names on a local syndicated interview that aired in this market over the weekend, which probably ran a week before it should have, because in the interview promoting the Hart vs. Luger match in San Francisco, Hart talked about Luger's steel plate in his forearm, which wasn't going to be acknowledged in the storyline for another week. Unlike in WCW, in the WWF hints aren't dropped unless the plan is to get there. Despite what has been written here the past few weeks, if such a match were to take place at SummerSlam, the only logical ending I can see is a Hart victory. The screw job where heels attack both and they clean house together burying the hatchet was done at the same show 1 year ago and would be a letdown if the same basic finish was done a second time. Hogan beating Hart makes no sense because it's doubtful the timing would be right for Hart to be able to elevate himself by losing as he did in last year's SS match with Davey Boy Smith. All the inside speculation I hear is that Hogan is unlikely to do a job for Hart, which throws another monkey wrench into the plans, particularly since some behind-the-scenes maneuvering attempts are to elevate Brutus Beefcake ahead of both Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect on the babyface ladder, as evidenced by the closing scene at Mania, which didn't air on pay-per-view, with Hogan, Savage, Beefcake and Vince McMahon in the ring together. A few clarifications need to be made regarding the laws involving anabolic steroid use as it relates to what was reported here in the April 5 issue. First off, the 1990 Anabolic Steroid Act originally contained a provision which specifically stated that a physical trainer, advisor, manager, coach, etc. who encourages, persuades, or induces an individual to possess or use anabolic steroids would be in violation of the law with a maximum term of 2 years in prison. However, that specific part of the act wasn't voted into law. It was reported in many bodybuilding magazines and here on 2 occasions, including April 5, that it was the law. However, according to DEA agent Paul Soffer, there are already laws on the books that cover encouraging, persuading or inducing use of controlled substances, a category anabolic steroids now fall into, and he said that, for example, if a coach tells a player to use steroids or provides a connection, whether it be a doctor or other source where a player can get steroids, then he can be prosecuted as a felony for conspiracy and aiding and abetting use of a controlled substance, so a similar law was largely already on the books covering it. As far as rewarding use through financial incentives based on who is what spot, as would be the case in some sports, and at certain points several pro wrestling organizations have to fit into this category, that can't be prosecuted under that law unless the encouragement was done specifically telling the person to use steroids, and not simply telling someone they need to gain weight to get a job, or the implication based on who is making the most money that using steroids would be a good thing for someone on a professional basis. As far as how this law applies to the current U.S. Justice Department investigation of whatever it is involving Titan Sports in some fashion that is being investigated, simply the rewarding of top spots in a manner that encouraged steroid use, even after the 1991 law, wouldn't fit into the category of what could be prosecuted under federal law unless there was specific aiding and abetting that you, which is a correction from the April 5th issue. By the way, in regard to that investigation and anything you may hear as far as gossip or whatever in regard to what the end result will be is uneducated speculation. As outside of government officials, I don't really believe anyone else has a clue. As far as the question as to whether steroids were a legal drug, as has been used many times by various people as an excuse to justify prior usage, I used them, but they were legal then. In many cases, that was incorrect. Steroids themselves have never been a legal drug without a prescription, although the federal law regarding possession being a felony didn't go into effect until 1991. Before the law was enacted, most states had individual laws regarding use and what was categorized as proper dispensation. In many states that had those laws, using them for muscle building purposes didn't qualify as proper dispensation, and possession, and it varied by the state. Possession for non-therapeutic reasons was specifically illegal in many states dating back several years. As far as the use of syringes and the legality of such, which was brought into question since the April 5th issue, according to Soffer, they fall into the category of possession of drug paraphernalia. Thus possession would be illegal, unless there is a proper medical reason such as a diabetic needing insulin, and that law also goes back prior to the federal anabolic steroid law. AAA. Several of the wrestlers appeared in a 2-hour segment of Why Usted Que Opina? On April 16, a Mexico City-based morning talk show that was also broadcast on Spanish stations live into the United States. The show was to push the Plaza de Toros card on April 30, and among those appearing on the show were Super Muñeco, El Hijo del Santo Ref El Tirantes, Conan El Barbaro, Mexican midget champ Mascarita Sagrada Louisiana Parka, Cien Caras, Martha Villalobos, television announcer Dr. Alfonso Moral, winners Angel Blanco Jr., Pero Aguayo, and Fuerza Guerrera. Guerrera issued a challenge to Santo while Conan and Caras were challenging back and forth to build up their loser leaves town match on the big show. Conan as a face and Caras as a heel were the two most over wrestlers to the general public audience. This past weekend's Galavision show was pretty hot, except for the opener, which saw them miss nearly every big move, particularly the dives. The Rey Mysterio Jr. and Volador and Misterioso vs. Heavy Metal and Psicosis and Jerry Estrada match was below par for these guys, and only partially because of Psicosis' rib injury. He was injured on the previous week's television doing a Liger dive, must be the costume, and landing with his ribs on the guard Rey. However, the big dive finish was capped off by yet another contender for the best dive of all time as Mysterio climbed to the middle rope and moonsaulted over the top rope onto the floor with a body block hitting Psicosis, and he sure must trust him. Pretty hot angle in the next match scheduled as Conan and Latin Lover and Love Machine as the Sexy Boys trio against Fishman and La Parka and Ice Killer. Lover, who looks like Johnny B. Bad but is really green, came out on crutches with an ankle injury and was replaced by Winners. La Parka, who is one of the most underrated workers around, took the crutches and did a number on him while Fishman was beating on Love Machine and Winners with the other crutch, and Ice Killer was pounding Conan with his hockey stick. Conan ended up getting Ice Killer's goalkeeper mask off and put it on himself, head-butted all three heels. Headline was Blue Panther vs. Vulcano in a mask versus hair match, which was better than I'd been led to believe. It's weird. Panther is supposed to be a heel and this was supposed to be a heel versus heel feud. Panther was the most over face on the card except for Conan. So El Tirantes, the heel ref, DQ'd Panther in the first fall largely for doing nothing. Promoter Antonio Payne comes out and throws Tirantes out of the match and replaces him with Pepe Casas, the father of Heavy Metal, Felino and Negro Casas. Casas DQ'd Vulcano in the second fall for Ice Killer's interference. They went back and forth with near falls until Panther got a submission and the crowd went nuts as Vulcano was shaved. It wasn't classic Panther. His best matches are as a scientific heel having a title match against a good technical face. This coming week's television features the TV debut of the new trio Fantasia of Super Muñeco, Lamparin, Aladdin, and Hazam El Genio, the Genie. Highlight is the Mexican midget title match with Mascarita Sagrada vs. Espectrito, which featured Sagrada doing a blind moonsault out of the ring. Also on this weekend's television, Phantasma turned heel on Mascara Sagrada in a bout where the two were partners. Liz Mark retained the Mexican light heavyweight title on April 11 in Acapulco, beating La Parca. It appears, judging from television, that the Friday night shows continued to draw sellouts, 10,600, each week in Mexico City. EMLL. El Tigre Hispano Ventura Lajos has taken over as booker from Marco Moreno, who resigned last week. Moreno's other position, as the head of the EMLL Public Relations Department, was taken over by Masacre Radamez Coco, who is retired as a wrestler to work in the office. One of the first moves by Lajos is to cut down on all the interpromotional matches with UWA. They were being done so often they had become commonplace and were no longer drawing, so the theory is if they're pretty well eliminated, when they are brought back for big shows, they'll result in helping the gate. This came just after UWA wrestler Dr. Wagner Jr. won the CMLL light heavyweight title from this group's top drawing card, Pierre Roth Jr. on April 2 at Arena Mexico, winning both the second and third falls via submission with La Palanca de Marcus Fujiwara armbar, which I guess was popularized by Alfonso Dantes in the 60s. Wagner also holds the CMLL's tag team title with Connect. Great Sasuke and Super Dolphin from Japan are headed here in June. This group has Arena Coliseo booked for 5 major cards in 8 days between April 23 and April 30 in order to try and burn out the Mexico City market before AAA's big show on April 30. This building, which used to be an automatic sellout on Fridays, has been drawing largely poor houses of late. The biggest show of the burnout period will be April 28, and they again inviting several of the legendary old-timers to make an appearance, such as Raul Romero, Blue Demon, Wolf Rubinsky, Cavernario Galindo, El Padrón, Huracan Ramirez, Ray Mendoza, and Black Shadow. Pierre Roth and Rayo de Jalisco Jr., first match back from suspension, and Canadian Vampire Casanova headline against Negro Casas and Black Magic and Fabuloso Blondie. It is seemingly more apparent that Predesa is more working with this group than starting up opposition. UWA. The feud with the recently turned villanos against Dos Caras continued as the major piece of news. On the April 11 El Toreo show, the main event was Dos Caras and Enrique Vera, and Atlantis vs. Crash the Terminator and Dr. Wagner Jr. and the Killer, which ended when Villanos 4 and 5 interfered in the third fall with chairs and posted and juiced Dos, and then stole his mass. Dos was juicing heavily and the referee grabbed manager Andy Barrow's bandana of the U.S. flag and wrapped it around Dos' head to preserve his identity. Earlier in the show, all 3 Villanos were DQ'd in straight falls against Silver King and El Texano and Dandy, including V1 hitting Dandy with a Pepsi bottle. Still, the crowd was a poor one, estimated around 2,000. April 18 has Villanos 4 and 5 teaming with Crash against Dos, and Enrique Vera and Super Astro on top. Ironically, the Villanos are heels at a show that is going to honor with a moment of applause the death of Villano II, their brother, who died in an April 14, 1989 auto accident. All Japan. Most of the news involves the goings-on in the Carnival Tournament, page 2. April 11 TV drew a 3.0 rating even though the show was delayed 30 minutes. Saw a photo from the April 10 Kenta Kobashi vs. Dan Crawford match which debuted a new move. Only was to describe it as it appears it started with Crawford doing a backward superplex off the middle rope on Kobashi, but dropping him straight down like a DDT. Kurt Bayer used the figure 4 leg lock for a submission win for the first time on April 15 and Soka beating Takao Omori. Bayer's father, the Destroyer, made the move famous in Japan in the early 1960s. New Japan/War. The New Japan crew was sent on a vacation to the Saipan Islands, a tourist spot for Japanese like Hawaii would be to Americans, to have training in a warm climate for Fukuoka Dome, which is getting the lion's share of publicity. Satoru Sayama, the original and legendary Tiger Mask, was on the cover doing an interview in this week's Gong, which is his first wrestling magazine interview in years. Sayama, who quit New Japan in 1983 and quit pro wrestling in 1985, was a forgotten figure in the wrestling world over the past few years but kind of underwent a rebirth in 1992 when a 3-volume videotape package with his great matches in New Japan was released and sold millions of dollars worth to young fans who had heard about the legend but were too young to either see or save videotapes of his match. It was somewhat known that some in New Japan wanted to book Sayama vs. Jushin Liger in Fukuoka Dome, but Sayama, now 35, never said anything about it. In his interview, Sayama said he'd be willing to work with New Japan as a trainer, but he's not a pro wrestler anymore, he's a shooter, and talked of training Koji Kanemoto to become the new Tiger Mask. Sayama said that he likes the current Japanese pro wrestling scene, which is a far cry from his interviews years back in martial arts magazines where he decried the business. He said that Kengo Kimura and Kunyaki Kobayashi had talked with him about returning to New Japan. He also wants the publicity among wrestling fans so he can promote his own shooting style group at Korakuen Hall to a larger audience. His shooting was drawing about 250 per show at Korakuen about 2 years back and may have disappeared since then, since I've heard nothing about that. Hulk Hogan and Masa Saito were on the cover of Weekly Pro talking about Hogan signing for Fukuoka Dome. Satoshi Kojima will miss Fukuoka Dome as he was injured in a boating accident while on the Saipan vacation. War from May 5th to May 20th will have King Haku, Earthquake, John Tenta, Rocky Aokiya and Dino Ventura as foreigners, plus New Japan's El Samurai, Michiyoshi Ohara, Super Strong Machine and the Skinheads will work the entire tour. War and New Japan will have a combined show on May 24th in Osaka. Other Japan notes. It appears the May 5th Atsushi Onita vs Terry Funk match will be one of those explosive barbed wire matches. Masahiko Kimura, a legendary wrestler from the 50s, passed away at his home in Kawasaki on April 18 at the age of 75. Kimura was the first Japanese heavyweight champion and Rikidozen's first tag team partner against Mike and Ben Sharp. Later he had one of the most famous matches of that decade against Rikidozen on December 22, 1954 when Rikidozen won the title. Kimura was originally a judo star while Rikidozen was a sumo before becoming the Babe Ruth of Japan as a pro wrestler, and the sumo versus judo match for the first time was a gimmick that made for the memorable match in the primitive days of Japanese wrestling. UWFI on May 6 at Budokan Hall has Nobuhiko Takada vs Dan Severn, Barry Albright vs Mark Fleming, Big Van Vader vs Tatsuo Nakano and Kiyoshi Tamura vs Naoki Sano as the top 4 matches. Yoshiaki Fujiwara is going to run a PWFG show at Korakuen Hall on June 1 dedicated to the late Masami Soranaka. All Japan Women held a press conference on April 17 in Tokyo with both the president of JWP and LLPW in attendance. They announced the 3.5-month-long annual Japan Grand Prix singles tournament, May 3 to August 21, to determine the number 1 contender for Asia Kong's world title. JWP will send Hikari Fukuoka, and LPW sends Harley Saito to the tournament, which will consist of a red group: Akira Hokuto, Suzuka Minami, Tashio Yamada, Etsuko Mita, Takako Inoue, Saki Hasegawa, Tomoko Watanabe and Saito, and a blue group: Yumiko Hata, Minami Toyoda, Kyoko Inoue, Mima Shimoda, Bat Yoshinaga, Kaoru Ito, Simi Numata and Fukuoka. Each group will do a round robin with each group's top 2 place winners meeting to decide the group champion and the 2 winners of that coming back for the overall title on August 21 at Korakuen Hall. They also announced a May 8 show at Korakuen Hall as part of Golden Week headlined by Hokuto and Yamada vs Toyota and Hata. The Bull Nakano vs Devil Masami match took place April 18 at Korakuen Hall with Bull winning with her new twisting somersault leg drop, which sounds better than the regular somersault leg drop but is actually not as good visually, in 37:36 in what was written up in the papers as a Superman. Dynamite Kansai kept the JWP title beating Fukuoka in the semifinal. It was also announced at the press conference that Kansai and Mayumi Ozaki of JWP, who hold the WWWA tag team titles, will defend the belts on June 3 in Sapporo against an all-Japan team, but it won't be Toyota and Yamada. The first chain match I can recall in years took place on a PWC show April 17 in Toto with Shunji Takano beating Isao Takagi. American rules are starting to take effect in the smaller groups as on April 16 in Hakata, Super Dolphin defended the UWF Super Welterweight belt against Great Sasuke. Sasuke won via COR and the crowd thought it was a title change, but it was announced due to the COR, the title didn't change. In Mexico and Japan since time began, titles change via DQ or COR finish unless they were American-based titles, in which case the American rules are in effect. They ran an angle regarding that in the early 80s when Nick Bockwinkel was DQ'd in an Awa title match against Jumbo Tsuruta, and the crowd all thought the title had changed because up to that point it always had via DQ, but since it was an American title it was ruled different. I had the chance to see the Dream Slam show on a handheld video. It was definitely one of the greatest wrestling shows ever. The only drawback is maybe there was too much for one show, as 6 hours may be overkill. Instead of producing it as a show to fit a time limit, it seemed like in 8 of the 11 matches, everyone was out there trying to have the best match of their career since it was the biggest crowd any of them had ever worked in front of, with time restraints be damned. That was largely the case as it had more great matches than any Starrcade and was easily superior as an overall show to the 1989 Baltimore Bash and Music City Showdown, are largely remembered as the best major US big shows of the past 5 years. They also did what WCW should, and no doubt won't, do for the legends. They had 21 of the most famous retired wrestlers in the 25-year history of the company come out, to their original entrance music, walk down the aisle while a tape is playing on the big screen of the finish of the match with them winning a major title, or in the case of Dump Matsumoto, making a spectacular ring entrance. So you see them walking down the aisle today superimposed on the big screen of them in their prime in the ring. Considering what the ticket prices were, the combined gates on the two All-Star Dream Slam shows may have approached $2 million, and that isn't taking gimmick sales into account. With the videos going for $177 and $155 respectively, it doesn't take an awful lot of sales for that to add up to some hefty numbers. Kong and Nakano lost their first tag team match ever on April 16 in Hamamatsu to Hokuto and Hata when Hokuto pinned Bull. Nakano is only working sporadic dates as far as the nightly touring goes, so she'll be doing more jobs to put over the younger girls who have to carry the load every night. I guess the deal with Ishinriki quitting now was simply a work after all, since he was back on the April 18 show in Hamamatsu. He did an interview saying he couldn't understand why Kendo Nagasaki, former partner, is now teaming with Umanosuke Ueda, so I guess it's to build up Nagasaki versus Ishinriki. Oriental Pro had a show on April 17 in Hiratsuka. I believe legitimately Oriental Pro no longer exists except in name, as all its wrestlers work for Wing, and Wing simply promotes rare shows using the Oriental name to give the illusion of a promotion versus promotion feud. Rings on April 24 in Yokohama has Folk Han versus Mitsuya Nagai, Bart Vale versus Hans Nyman, and Dick Frey versus Peter Ura. Apparently FMW won't be using Tiger Jeet Singh Jr. and Sr. anymore. USWA. Simply Divine Rex King aka Mike Smith and Steve Dahl, formerly the Southern Rockers in Oregon and Puerto Rico, now as heels, won the USWA Tag Team titles from the Moondogs, Larry Booker and Bubba White, on April 12 in Memphis. Irony is that Rex King took his wrestling name from the names of the two original but no longer Moondogs Rex, Randy Cully, and King, Sailor White. They also got involved in the main event, a 10-man tag with Lawler's Army versus the First Family, when they used ether on a towel to put Jeff Jarrett out and he was pinned by Brian Christopher. There was no mention of either the First Family or Lawler's Army this week, so it was just a one-week gimmick for one match. Randy Savage was back working with Jerry Lawler all weekend. Savage set the all-time record on April 16 in Jonesboro, Arkansas, drawing a sellout 1,200 fans against Lawler. However, the next night in Nashville drew just 500, well down from the sellout 1,800 the two drew in their previous match. In Nashville, unlike in their two previous matches, Lawler received about 90% cheers. It was surmised that the WWF fans who came to cheer for Savage at the previous shows didn't come back, and they were left with the weekly USW or regular fans who only see Savage as the heel he's been on the local TV, so he was heavily booed and worked total heel. Lawler had Savage pinned after a fist drop off the top when Sensational Sherry interfered and beat up Lawler for the DQ. Lawler made his own safe cleaning house on both of them. Christopher turned babyface on television April 17, although it may only be a short-term deal. Simply Divine was beating on Jarrett, who was wrestling Doug Gilbert, back after losing a Loser Leaves Town match a few weeks back so he could tour Japan for Wing. As it was 3-on-1, Christopher ran in as well, but King and Dahl knocked him out of their way twice. Christopher said he was trying to help them, but they'd pay for knocking him down. Jarrett wound up doing a stretcher job and Dahl kicked him off the stretcher, which led to Jarrett and Christopher versus Simply Divine for the USWA Tag titles on April 19. Earlier in the show, Sensational Sherry showed up and said she was Christopher's new girlfriend and challenged Miss Texas for the USWA Women's title. Later, Lawler was doing an interview and Sherry made fun of him. Lawler then asked Sherry what was the difference between herself and trash. Sherry didn't know. Lawler said that at least somebody wants to pick up trash. Sherry slapped him. Lawler tried to piledrive her, but Savage came out and he and Sherry were beating on Lawler. Eddie Marlin tried to break things up, but they attacked him as well. Later in the show, Miss Texas was doing an interview and Sherry showed up again and tore off half of Texas' clothes and threw her over the desk. April 19 in Memphis is billed as Macho Monday with Doug Gilbert versus Danny Davis, Poco Ware versus Scotty Flamingo, Harlem Knights versus Moondogs in a Falls Count Anywhere match, Texas versus Sherry for USWA Women's belt, King and Dahl versus Jarrett and Christopher for tag title, and Lawler versus Savage in a cage match. SMW. Robert Gibson was back after missing just one full weekend with a sprained ankle. In Johnson City and Knoxville on April 17 and April 18, they ran three-team street fight matches with the Rock and Roll Express, Stan Lane and Tom Pritchard and Robert Fuller and Jimmy Golden, with the Rock and Rolls winning. The matches introduced a new gimmick each night. In Johnson City it was jumper cables and in Knoxville it was highway cones. Every wrestler on the undercard ended up involved in the Knoxville match, which was taped for television. The next Johnson City show will be labeled The Last Tangle in Tennessee, headlined by a Loser Leaves Town match with Rock and Roll Express versus Lane and Pritchard. May 9th in Knoxville will be Volunteer Slam 2. Headliner is Rage in the Cage, A match similar to War Games with Lane and Pritchard and Kevin Sullivan and Killer Kyle and Tasmaniac versus Rock and Rolls and Brian Lee and Fuller and Golden. The card will feature 5 singles matches from these teams picked at ringside. Whichever side wins at least 3 of the matches gets the 2-on-1 and 3-on-2 etc. advantages in the War Games situation. The only way to win the match is submission or to handcuff all 5 members of one team to the 5 handcuffs that will be on each side of the ring. Bob Armstrong will be special ref. Also Tracy Smothers versus Tony Anthony in a Coward Waves the Flag match with Tim Horner and Ron Wright in the respective corners with flags. WCW is already plugging a TV taping on May 17th in Knoxville with 2 kids free with every paying adult and adult tickets at $8, which can help the crowd for this show. Bobby Eaton's final night was the April 19th television taping in Barberville, Kentucky where he dropped the TV title to Brian Lee. This week's television saw Armstrong make the announcement about Eaton not getting a valid WCW release and that he has to leave SMW as soon as he drops the TV title. They also aired Ricky Morton getting tarred and feathered and had an impromptu Fuller and Golden versus Lane and Pritchard match which saw both Dutch Mantell and Eaton interfere. Some notes on the past month's television. Tracy Smothers has to be the most improved interview in the business and Tony Anthony's presence is getting to the point it almost equals his work rate. The Kevin Sullivan vs Yukihiro Kanemura match from 4 weeks ago was a little too much. All the blood on the face is stuff that has been seen before, but driving the spike into the bicep and trying to squeeze the blood out was too far even for the bloodthirsty. The crowd live was dead quiet, they were so stunned and shocked. Highlights of April 2nd Pikeville aired last week. Crowd heat was exceptional for the 3 bouts that aired. Sullivan vs Lee had incredible heat although the work itself wasn't that great. Sullivan's a great character in interview although he's on the edge, but Lee is just another guy. Sullivan pulled out pliers and used them to go after Lee's groin, which got the crowd screaming, but don't try that one at home. Smothers vs White Boy chain match seemed dramatic and the pop when Smothers won was reminiscent of the Sting pop beating Flair in Baltimore in 1990. The 9-man street fight had too much action for a TV screen. A correction from 2 weeks back. When Eaton and Gibson were brawling, it wasn't on the basketball basket rim but on a pole that was behind the backboard. Bobby Blaze, who worked on the recent Australia tour, has been working some openers, has impressed folks. Debuting at the television taping was Tammy Fitch, real name Tammy Sitch, who according to the storyline has filed a sexual discrimination suit against Smoky Mountain Wrestling for having no female employees. She said she was a college student from Hillary Clinton's alma mater and talks about Hillary as her personal hero. On one interview, she was asking Dixie Dynamite if she could become his manager and said that she wants to be just like Hillary Clinton, taking a nobody all the way to the top. Dynamite turned her down. Blaze also debuted at TV, but lost to Eaton in a TV title match that airs April 24th. Chris Condito did some jobs as the Masked Avenger but also debuted as himself doing an interview claiming to be WWA heavyweight champion from New Jersey. Texas. GWF looks to be getting back on television and in syndication. Joe Tigg, owner of Westway Ford, who used to have local commercials with the Simpson Brothers and Dingo Warrior, has gotten into a joint venture and purchased Maxx Andrews' syndicated wrestling network, which has been dormant since Andrews has been waiting for Evolve to get started. Starting with the April 23rd card, tapings will be made for several dozen markets. Current plan is to tape 2 hours of television at every other Friday night show. Westway Ford will plug GWF in its commercials in the market, plus the dealership will heavily comp the Friday night shows, and in return they'll get ample space as the main sponsor of the television. Only bouts announced for the first taping are John Hawk vs Sweet Daddy Falcone, Black Bart and Johnny Mantell vs Angel and Mystery Partner and Ebony Experience vs Kongs. Terry Sims won the Big D heavyweight belt on April 11th in Dallas from Bill Irwin. The belt was held up after a rematch on April 18th and will be settled on April 25th. The original Super Destroyers tag team that worked global on April 16th turned out to be Bill Irwin, who was one of the originals, and Gary Young under Hoods. Al Perez also worked that show going to a double countout with Black Bart. Freddie Fargo completed his angle on April 18th in Wiley, Texas, saying he guaranteed John Hawk, Bobby Duncombe Jr. and Ref James Beard wouldn't show up to face him. Of course it was easy since Hawk and Duncombe were booked elsewhere and Beard was in Japan, but when they no-showed, they gave the 4 flat tires on the car excuse as Fargo pulled out as ice pick and gave a slashing motion. Here and there. Burt Prentice ran his first show on April 12th at Splash Casino in Tunica, Mississippi, 40 miles from Memphis, drawing a sellout 715. A second show is planned April 28th, Ron Harris vs. John Hawk and Tommy Rich vs. Junkyard Dog, after which point they plan on going weekly. A sister casino in Greenville, Mississippi will start weekly shows on June 10th, and similar plans are for yet-to-be-opened casinos in Biloxi and New Orleans. May 27th in Langhorne, Pennsylvania has Tony Atlas vs. Warlord cage match, Misty Blue vs. Linda Dallas cage match, and Mask vs. Mask with Cheetah Kid vs. Black Scorpion. Brad Muster signed with the New Orleans Saints. Correction from a report on Don Rowlett's convention. While no USWA performers appeared at the convention, there was cooperation as USWA set up a gimmick table at the convention, and Jerry Jarrett allowed Don Rowlett to sell tickets and put out flyers at the Nashville shows, and the fans attending the USWA show from out of town were recognized. Thanks to Debbie Combs for accepting the newsletter award for this newsletter. Congrats to John Muse. Billy Jack Haynes starts this coming weekend with a weekly radio show in Portland, Oregon from 8 to 9 a.m. on Saturdays of Con. 15:50 a.m. WCW. The Blackhearts, Tom Nash and Dave Johnson, were scheduled to start on April 20th at television, and are already booked for house show dates. I believe Charlie Norris is also getting a tryout this week. The April 12th television taping at Center Stage was canceled at the last minute because somebody forgot to check the schedule for the TBS production trucks. One was with the Braves, the other with the Hawks, which has happened in the past, and they just rent a truck, but somehow this didn't happen, so it was rescheduled for April 21st at Center Stage. Marcus Bagwell, the Cole Twins, and Eric Watts went to Center Stage on April 12th and signed autographs for those who came for the last-minute cancellation. Sid Vicious should be in around June. I don't believe a deal is completed with Tully Blanchard, but negotiations are underway. Supposedly he's being offered a $500 per night deal, and he's looking for an old-fashioned yearly contract. The Cactus Jack vs. Big Van Vader match aired this past Saturday, edited so that none of the blood was visible on television. It was beyond brutal in what Vader did to Jack, but I'm not sure the effect of the brutality got across to the average fan at home. The surprise win by Cactus and Vader's incredible post-match performance made the thing the most believable thing on a major promotion television show in a long time. Rematch will be taped April 21st and air this coming Saturday. Cactus, despite the concussion, 24 stitches and dislocated jaw, didn't even miss one booking. Cole Twins match on Saturday should have never aired. Prices will be increased in some if not most of the cities from the current $15, $8 and $2 to $15, $10 and $5, which should at least help the anemic grosses a little bit. The latest price cut with the $2 kids ticket seemed to help get the number in the building up the first time in the various markets, but by the second time, they were getting the same size crowd they were always getting, only this time making less money in the process. Remember this word, scriptwriters. While Ric Flair got a great response at all the houses, the flair for the gold segments with Vinny Vegas and Johnny B. Bad were said to have not been good, let alone proper use of flair. Rick Steamboat and Steve Austin were said to have had 4 stars cage matches this week. Austin went over since the tag team title was up in the cage matches, since they were originally going to do the tag title match in the cage. Shane Douglas missed the week with a separated shoulder. Dustin Rhodes returned from his shoulder separation on April 14th in New York. With the exception of Sting, Chris Benoit got the best face reaction in Toronto, so of course he put over Bad. Simmons was booed against Wyndham on the same show. Flash, this angle in for Slamboree. As Tully Blanchard makes his return, he's attacked out of nowhere by Tiger Jeet Singh, who chops his head off with his sword. Because of his belief in religion, Blanchard will survive the blow and start wrestling in June as the Headless Horseman. WWF. Hulk Hogan is working just 3 WWF dates in May. He's teaming with Brutus Beefcake vs. Money Incorporated in Pittsburgh on May 21st, Philadelphia on May 22nd, and at the Meadowlands on May 22nd, which is sort of strange for the WWF champion to be challenging for the tag team title. I don't know of any singles matches until the June 13th pay-per-view show, but Hogan will be working something of a regular schedule, 3 to 4 times per week, starting in June. Hogan has been filming Thunder in Paradise of late, with both Beefcake and Jimmy Hart having small roles in the CBS movie pilot. WWF has contacted several of the leading indie promoters and told them not to use the name Nails when using Kevin Wakehal's. I'm told they don't seem to care about usage of any ex-WWF ring names of other former employees. Sean Mooney will be gone once his contract expires. I believe that's only about a week or 2 away. Gene Okerlund is already doing event centers, but word we get is that is only temporary. Looks like the Beverly Brothers' turn was only a 1-week program to set up the one television match. Randy Savage is still working a few house dates in May against Giant Gonzalez. With Luna Vachon in, they can now make use of the guy who used to put together those Ultimate Warrior interviews. Definitely one bizarre character. What a difference an announcing team makes. Owen Hart vs. Bam Bam Bigelow aired both on Superstars and All-American this past week. On Superstars, with Vince McMahon, Jerry Lawler and Randy Savage announcing, they were on the verge of about a 3.5 stars match until Hart blew out his knee, and they had to go to the finish. I believe the original match was building up to some hotter moves by Hart and a tope, and somehow Bigelow would squeak by Viacor with the idea that Hart would get over as a single and it would start a program between the two. As it turned out, they were having the hot match, but the knee went and Hart had to lay down for the pin right away. Because of the finish having to be changed, I was surprised the match even aired. On All-American, the same match came off as dull and lifeless because Gorilla Monsoon and the Wizard, Bruce Pritchard aka Brother Love, in his first week in his new role as heel color man, were so busy trying to put each other over that they were ignoring near falls and the entire match storyline, although they did show their clairvoyance in calling the knee injury about 5 minutes before it happened. Gonzalez did the first clean jobs of his career for Undertaker on the European tour this past week. Talk is that Ron and Don Harris won't be coming in after all. There's something both humorous and deceptive about Scott Steiner doing the double bicep pose in the new IcoPro ad. IcoPro has nearly as much to do with Scott developing those guns as ice cream, mayo and beer have to do with Rick Rude's abs. Not that every other GNC food supplement ad is any different, with the roided up bodybuilders in the ad giving the marks in the public the idea they look like that through taking whatever supplement is being plugged rather than it mainly being roids and favorable genetics. They are doing kids discounts at a lot of the house shows these next few months. For example, in San Francisco, it's kids $3 off on every ticket. The shows in the United Kingdom continue to sell out every night, including 2 consecutive $350,000 houses at Wembley Arena in London on April 15th and April 16th. The first night of the tour in Paris was nowhere close to full, but even 5,000 people at those prices is still in the $150,000 range. The Frank Anderson who beat Terry Taylor in Paris, I believe, is the same Swedish wrestler who won an Olympic medal in wrestling and was training with Brad Rheingans in Minnesota.